Hello friends, welcome back my YouTube channel. If you want to watch the super hit movie X-Men The Last Stand in full HD, then first of all, give this video a like, and if you're visiting our channel for the first time, then subscribe to this channel. The name of the movie we are going to discuss in today's video is X-Men The Last Stand. So we will give you information about how and where you will get to watch X-Men The Last Stand film officially. Apart from this, we will give you a detailed look at the pre-production, post-production, budget, box office collection, and filming of this movie. A detailed review of the movie will also be given in this video, where we will explain the story of this movie in detail. We will also discuss the cast and casting performance of the movie. Apart from this, information about the music department and technical department will also be given. Because of this video is going to be very interesting and entertaining. So you must watch this video till the end. And if you haven't liked this video yet, then like this video now and subscribe to this channel. So let's start the video. X-Men The Last Stand is a 2006 superhero film based on the X-Men comic books published by Marvel Entertainment Group. It is the sequel to X2 2003 and the third installment in the X-Men film series, as well as the final film of the original X-Men trilogy. It was directed by Ratner and features an ensemble cast including Hugh Jackman, Halle, Ian McKellen, Famke Janssen, Anna Paquin, Kelsey Grammer, James Marsden, Rebecca Roman, Shawn Ashmore, Aaron Stanford, Vinnie Jones, and Patrick Stewart. Written by Simon Kinberg and Zach Penn, the film is loosely based on two X-Men comic book story arcs, Gifted and the Dark Phoenix Saga, with a plot that revolves around a mutant cure that causes serious repercussions among mutants and humans, and on the resurrection of Jean Grey, who unleashes a dark force. Bryan Singer, who had directed the two previous films, X-Men and X2, decided to leave the sequel to work on Superman Returns, 2006. X2 composer and editor John Ottman and X2 writers Dan Harris and Michael Dougherty also left to work on Superman Returns, as did James Marsden, who had very limited screen time in The Last Stand before his character was killed off due to his departure from the film. Singer had not even defined the storyline for a third film. Matthew Vaughn, who co-wrote the script, though uncredited, and was initially hired as the new director, left due to personal and professional issues and was replaced with Ratner. Filming took place from August 2005 to January 2006, with a budget of $210 million, and was consequently the most expensive film ever made at the time of its release. It had extensive visual effects created by 11 different companies. X-Men The Last Stand premiered in the Out of Competition section at the 2006 Cannes Film Festival and was released theatrically in the United States on May 26 by 20th Century Fox. It grossed approximately $459 million worldwide, becoming the seventh highest grossing film of 2006. It was at the time the highest grossing film in the series, and after 2018 stood as the fourth highest grossing film of the franchise. It received mixed reviews from critics. A standalone sequel, The Wolverine, was released in 2013. It was followed by X-Men Days of Future Past in 2014, which reconned the events of The Last Stand. Plot. In 1986, Charles Xavier and Magneto meet young Jean Grey at her parents' house to invite her to join their school, the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. 10 years later, in 1996, industrialist Warren Worthington II discovers his son is a mutant, as the latter tries to cut off his wings. In the present, Worthington Labs announces an inoculation to suppress the X gene that gives mutants their abilities and offers the cure to any mutant who wants it. The cure interests some mutants, such as Rogue, who cannot touch anyone without harming them, while others are wary of it. Magneto reestablishes his Brotherhood of Mutants with those who oppose the cure, warning it will be weaponized to exterminate the mutant race. With help from Pyro, Callisto, and several other mutants, Magneto attacks a mobile prison. He frees Mystique, Multiple Man, and Juggernaut. Mystique shields Magneto from a cure dart and loses her mutant abilities, so he abandons her. Cyclops, still distraught over the loss of Grey, drives to her resting location at Alkali Lake. Grey suddenly appears to Cyclops, but kills him as they kiss. Sensing trouble, Xavier sends Logan and Storm to investigate. When they arrive, they find only telekinetically floating rocks, Cyclops glasses, and an unconscious Grey. At the X-Mansion, Xavier explains that when Grey sacrificed herself to save them, she also freed the Phoenix, a dark alternate personality with godlike destructive potential which Xavier had telepathically repressed. Logan is disgusted to learn of this psychic tampering with Grey's mind, but once she awakens, he discovers that she killed Cyclops and is not the woman he once knew. The Phoenix emerges, knocks out Logan, and escapes to her childhood home. Learning of Grey's return, Magneto and the Brotherhood arrive at the house simultaneously as the X-Men, with Magneto and Xavier both vying for Grey's loyalty until the Phoenix resurfaces. She destroys the house and disintegrates Xavier, then leaves with Magneto. A depowered Mystique gives up Magneto's base in the woods to the FBI, who raid it. However, the detected human heat signatures in the camp are Multiple Man and his copies. Magneto and the Brotherhood attack Alcatraz to kill a young mutant named Jimmy, whose genome is used to create the cure. They overwhelm the military troops until the remaining X-Men arrive to confront them. During the fight, Kitty Pryde saves Jimmy from Juggernaut, Iceman subdues Pyro, and Logan distracts Magneto for Hank McCoy to inject him with the cure, nullifying his powers. The Phoenix awakens and begins destroying anyone within range of her powers. Logan realizes that only he can stop the Phoenix due to his healing factor and adamantium skeleton. When Logan approaches her, Grey momentarily gains control and begs him to save her. Logan is forced to stab Grey, fatally wounding her. Sometime later, mutant rights are finally obtained, and Xavier's school still operates with Storm as headmistress. The President of the United States appoints McCoy as ambassador to the United Nations. Rogue, having taken the cure, rekindles her relationship with Iceman. Meanwhile, Magneto sits at a chessboard in San Francisco, seemingly human and weak, and as he gestures toward a metal chess piece, it wobbles slightly. Elsewhere, Moira McTaggart, while checking on a comatose patient, is startled when he greets her with Xavier's voice. Cast: Hugh Jackman as Logan Wolverine, a Canadian mutant born with hyperacute, animal-like senses, claws on his hands, and an accelerated healing factor that made it possible to implant a coating of the indestructible metal alloy adamantium on his skeleton. Jackman was pleased to see that the script allowed Wolverine to expand his character choices, as instead of questioning whether he would remain a loner or join the X-Men, Logan now is asked if he will play a leadership role in the X-Men. Halle Berry as Aurora Munro, a mutant who is one of Xavier's earlier students and the leader of the X-Men in Cyclops' absence. Storm is a woman with the ability to manipulate the weather. Berry had stated during interviews for X2 that she would not return unless the character had a significant presence comparable to the comic book version, leading to a larger role in The Last Stand's script. Berry declared that her ethnicity made the actress identify with the cure plot. When I was a child, I felt that if only I could change myself, my life would be better. As I've gotten older, I've come to terms with what utter nonsense that is. The character was given a more modern haircut, and costume designer Judianna Makovsky opted to give Storm more black clothes, a color she only wore in the leather costume for previous films, to make her tougher and sexier. Ian McKellen as Eric Laneshire, leader and founder of the Brotherhood. Magneto is a mutant Holocaust survivor who wages war against humanity in the name of mutant superiority. He has the ability to control and manipulate metal, making him one of the most powerful mutants. Well known for his homosexuality, McKellen found a parallel of the cure with many prejudices. It's abhorrent to me, as it would be if a person said I need curing of my sexuality, or if someone said that black people could take a pill that would cure them of being black. McKellen's shooting schedule had to accommodate his work in both the Da Vinci Code, 2006, and the London Theatre, going as far as filming the actor in England to later superimpose into the Vancouver plates. Patrick Stewart as Professor Charles Xavier, a mutant with uncharted telepathic powers and founder of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Xavier is an authority on genetic mutation and an advocate of peaceful relations between human and mutant kind. Stewart signed to the film without knowing Xavier would die and not meeting original director Matthew Vaughn. Both would meet in Manchester, where Stewart was filming 11th Hour, 2006. But eventually Brett Ratner called to introduce himself as the new director. Famke Janssen as Jean Grey. A mutant former member of the X-Men, a Class 5 mutant who possesses potentially limitless telepathic and telekinetic powers. The X-Men learn that she has survived the flooding dam from the previous film, but when the rest of the team finds her, Grey has given in completely to her aggressive alternate personality of her powers, the Phoenix. Her mutant powers rival those of Xavier. The writers described the multiple personalities as an Oedipal drama played out, where the Phoenix was someone embodying Greek goddess, while Jean Grey kept the character as a human, grounded in Freudian terms, a victim, a schizophrenic. To mark the change of Jean Grey into Phoenix, her wardrobe focused on red colors, an everyday fabric in contrast to the leather costumes of the X-Men. Digital makeup also made Jean's face darker, with her skin showing some veins and her eyes turning black, signifying the Phoenix personality of her powers. Halle Ram plays a young Jean Grey. Anna Paquin as Marie, a young mutant woman whose power causes her to temporarily take on the powers of anyone she touches, leaving her victims, mutant or human, unconscious. Rogue's lack of control over her power causes a great deal of strain on her relationship with Iceman. Paquin declared that while Rogue did not have a large physical component in this movie, the adult decisions the character was forced to make allowed for more intensity on the emotional side. Kelsey Grammer as Dr. Henry Hank McCoy, a mutant former student of Xavier's school who is now a member of the U.S. Cabinet as the Secretary of Mutant Affairs. Beast is a brilliant scientist and statesman. He is covered in blue fur and has heightened strength, reflexes, and agility, as well as pointed fangs and a lion-like roar. Grammer's makeup took 3 hours to apply. It involved applying latex prosthetics before painting his eye area and lips blue, applying various hairpieces and wigs, and a muscle suit covered with a hand-punched fursuit. James Marsden as Scott Summers' powerful energy blasts from his eyes and must wear specially made glasses to prevent the destruction of anything he looks at. Although he is in a committed relationship with Jean Grey, her Phoenix persona kills him early in the film. The decision to kill the character off early was due to a scheduling conflict that Marsden had with Superman Returns. Marsden saw no problem in having a smaller role, as the films opted to feature Wolverine as the standpoint character, and feeling that it's difficult when you have however many new characters that you're trying to introduce to an audience in 90 to 120 minutes to give everyone their due. Rebecca Romijn as Raven Darkholme, a blue-skinned mutant who possesses the ability to shapeshift to mimic anyone's appearance, as well as fight with incredible agility, reflexes, and strength. She is also a woman of few words. She jumps in front of cure darts intended for Magneto, and after she loses her mutant abilities as a result, Magneto abandons her. Romijn described this story as a traumatic experience for Mystique, given that the previous movies implied that she and Magneto had a deep-seated bond, and becoming a frail mortal would be her worst nightmare. Shawn Ashmore as Bobby Drake. A young mutant, Iceman can create constructs of ice or blasts of cold. Ashmore's commitments to X-Men made him decline Bryan Singer's invitation to play Jimmy Olsen in Superman Returns. The actor was content with his bigger role after Bobby joined the X-Men main team in X2, as during the previous production he wondered, when do I get to freeze something or get into a fight? Aaron Stanford as John Allardyce, a mutant who was a student of Xavier's school with a grudge against his former friend Bobby Drake. Pyro has the ability to manipulate fire, generated through wrist-mounted lighters. Stanford stated that with the Brotherhood, Pyro is allowed to fully explore his power for lacking moral restraints. The actor was comfortable with returning to the role, particularly for following The Hills Have Eyes, 2006, which had an exhausting shoot in the Moroccan desert, while Pyro was nowhere near as physically demanding. My characters pretty much stand and deliver, stand there and throw fire at people. There's no acrobatics. Vinnie Jones as Kane Marco. A mutant criminal recruited by the Brotherhood in a prison truck, Juggernaut is incredibly strong, fast, and once he gains momentum, he is nearly unstoppable. The film's version of Juggernaut is depicted as a mutant, and his relation to Charles Xavier was never mentioned. Matthew Vaughn cast Jones, who he met producing the Guy Ritchie gangster movies where Jones began his acting career. The actor had to go through a 4-hour makeup process to portray Juggernaut, which included a muscle suit and a prosthetic chin. The costume tried to retain the bullet-shaped helmet of the comics without going excessively over the top. Additionally, Elliot Page B appears as Kitty Pryde, a mutant with the ability to phase through matter and walk through solid objects. Her clear affection for Iceman further adds to the tension already present between Iceman and Rogue. Maggie Grace was considered for the role before Ratner invited Page, who impressed the director with his performance in Hard Candy, 2005. Page initially declined, not wanting to yet jump to Hollywood filmmaking, but accepted after reading the script. Page said part of his motivation was having a new experience. "I thought, well, when else am I going to have a chance to wear a leather suit and run through exploding things? Why not be a superhero for a change?" Daniel Cudmore appears as Peter Rasputin Colossus, a mutant with the ability to transform his body into an organic steel, while also granting him superhuman strength and a resistance to physical damage while in that form. Cudmore wore a foam latex muscle suit covered with a chrome-plated plastic, plus a hard plastic head to have the metal skin on the set, with some digital augmentation being used to enhance the facial expressions. A digital double was used only for stunts that could not be achieved practically, such as the fastball special, where Colossus throws Wolverine at Magneto. Ben Foster appears as Warren Worthington III, Angel, the mutant son of an industrialist, who has feathered wings, which allow him to fly. The static wings were models with a 15 feet, 4.6 meter wingspan and 5 feet, 1.5 meters height glued to Foster's back, replaced with computer-generated ones when movement was required. Caden Boyd appears as young Angel. Michael Murphy appears as Warren Worthington VI, the head of Worthington Labs, the corporation developing the cure. Worthington expects to rid his son of his mutant abilities. The addition of the character allowed Angel to integrate into the cure plot, 32, which also added a parallel between Warren's discovery of his son's mutation with a father finding out about his son's homosexuality. Dania Ramirez appears as Callisto. The leader of the Omegas, Callisto is a mutant with enhanced superhumanly acute senses, who senses mutants and their powers, and possesses superhuman speed and is an expert hand-to-hand combatant. The character combined the powers of the comics Callisto with another of the Morlocks, Caliban, and was written as someone who could be beautiful but with a tough persona. Ramirez had originally auditioned to play the mutant prostitute Stacy X, and impressed Brett Ratner so much that he decided to bring her in to play Callisto. Shohreh Aghdashloo appears as Dr. Kavita Rao, a scientist who works at Worthington Labs on the mutant cure. She is killed by Kid Omega. Aghdashloo signed without a completed script and erroneously said her character would be mutant Dr. Cecilia Reyes. Joseph Summer appears as the President. The President of the United States is tolerant of mutants, but fearful of the Brotherhood's threats. While creating the role, the producers felt that a different president, like an African American or a woman, had become a cliché in itself and went for a traditional route with an elder Caucasian man. Summer was invited by Ratner following their collaboration in The Family Man, 2000. Bill Duke appears as Trask. The head of the Department of Homeland Security, Trask aids the President of the United States during the war against the mutants. The character is probably related to the comic book's Bolivar Trask. However, his first name is never mentioned in the film, and he is portrayed as African American. In the comics, Bolivar Trask is the head of Trask Industries and creator of the mutant hunting Sentinels. Eric Dane appears as Multiple Man, a mutant and thief recruited by the Brotherhood in a prison truck. Madrox has the ability to create a very large number of copies of himself. The writers considered Dane's performance memorable, despite him being featured in only 2 scenes. Madrox's wardrobe invoked the symbols worn in his comics costume. Other actors who portrayed mutants are Mei-Ling Melanson as Psylocke, a mutant with the ability to teleport herself through areas of shadow, although that depiction differs significantly from the comics. Omahira Moda as Arclight, a mutant who has the ability to generate shock waves of concussive force. Ken Leung as Kid Omega, a mutant with the ability to eject spikes from his body, most notably his face, though the character resembles the comic books Quill and was later confirmed as such, though the official cast credits erroneously read Kid Omega, and Cameron Bright as Jimmy Leech, a mutant who has the ability to neutralize the powers of nearby mutants. Various characters were included at the suggestion of editor Mark Helfrich, who brought Marvel's X-Men Encyclopedia to director Brett Ratner, searching for mutants who could make appearance. These include Fat, a mutant that is a very large man who can slim down to fit in a smaller space, played by two actors, Via Saliumwa. Large Mode, and Richard Yee, Small Mode. Spike, played by Lance Gibson, a mutant who battles Wolverine in the forest by extruding bony spikes from his flesh. The character was added because the editing team felt that the original cut of the scene portrayed Logan as a cold-blooded killer, which could be changed if another mutant attacked Wolverine before he struck the Brotherhood and Glob Herman, played by Clayton Dean Watmo, a mutant with transparent skin. Mark Helfrich portrays an unnamed mutant with ash-gray skin. Various other mutants make cameos at the X-Mansion. Shauna Kane and Kia Wong reprise their cameo roles as Siren and Jubilee, respectively, and three identical girls in the background in one scene are a reference to the Stepford Cuckoos. Olivia Williams portrays Moira McTaggart. Adrian Ho, who previously voiced Nightcrawler in X-Men, the animated series, 1992 to 1997, appears as John Gray, Jean's father. X-Men co-creator Stan Lee and writer Chris Claremont have cameos in the film's opening scene as the neighbors of young Jean Grey. The sergeant directing defensive preparations before the Brotherhood assaults Alcatraz Island is played by R. Lee Ermey. Lloyd Adams portrays the green-skinned mutant who climbs the guard tower on Alcatraz. Many fans believe this was Toad, however the credits list him as Lizard Man, and Brett Ratner confirmed it was a Knoll. Avalanche and Vanisher also appear, however it is not known who portrayed them. Production. Development. Bryan Singer, the director of the first two 20th Century Fox X-Men films, left the project in July 2004 in favor of developing Superman Returns 2006 for Warner Bros. Pictures. Singer stated that he didn't fully have X-Men 3 in my mind, in contrast to a fully formed idea for a Superman film and interest in joining that franchise. By the time of his departure, Singer had only produced a partial story treatment with X2, 2003, screenwriters Dan Harris and Michael Dougherty, who accompanied him to Superman Returns. The treatment focused on Jean Grey's resurrection, which would also introduce the villainous Emma Frost, a role intended for Sigourney Weaver. Frost was an empath manipulating Jean's emotions in the treatment, and, like the finished film, Magneto desires to control her. Overwhelmed by her powers, Jean kills herself, but Jean's spirit survives and becomes a godlike creature, which Dougherty compared to the Star Child in 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. New contracts for returning cast members were made, as the actors and actresses had signed for only 2 films. Hugh Jackman's contract included the approval of director, initially offering the position to Darren Aronofsky, with whom he had just finished filming On the Fountain, 2006. Joss Whedon, whose comic book storyline, Gifted, from Astonishing X-Men, which he wrote was integrated into the script's plot, turned down the offer because he was working on a Wonder Woman film. Rob Bowman and Alex Proyas were also rumored to be up for consideration, though Proyas personally turned it down, citing feuds with Fox president Thomas Rothman while producing I, Robot, 2004. Zack Snyder was also approached, but he was already committed to 300, 2007. Peter Berg was also considered to direct the film, but he too turned down the job. Guillermo del Toro was also offered to direct the film, but turned down as he was already committed to Pan's Labyrinth, 2006. In February 2005, with still no director hired, Fox announced a May 5, 2006 release date, with filming to start in July 2005 in Vancouver. 1 month later, the studio signed Matthew Vaughn to direct and pushed the release date 3 weeks to May 26th, Memorial Day weekend. Vaughn cast Kelsey Grammer as Beast, Dania Ramirez as Callisto, and Vinnie Jones as Juggernaut, but family issues led him to withdraw before filming began. Vaughn was also cautious of the tight deadlines imposed by Fox, stating that he didn't have the time to make the movie that I wanted to make. In October 2023, Vaughn stated that he left the project after a group of executives had tried to sign Halle on with a fake script, which included scenes of Storm rescuing kids from Africa. Channing Tatum was vied for the role of Gambit before the character was written out of the film. Brett Ratner, who was previously considered to direct X-Men 2000 in 1996, and John Moore were both in the running to replace Vaughn during pre-production. On June 5, 2005, Ratner was confirmed as Vaughn's replacement. Ratner said he was surprised to get an invitation, as he thought he would have no chance to do a comic book film after the canceled Superman flyby for Warner Bros. With a limited knowledge of the X-Men mythos, Ratner trusted his writers on doing something faithful to the comics, having the script drawing all of its scenes from the original Marvel publications. Writing: Simon Kinberg, who had worked on 2 other Fox-produced Marvel Comics film adaptations, Fantastic Four and Elektra, both 2005, was hired as writer for X-Men 3 in August 2004. X2 co-writer Zach Penn was separately working on his own draft, and the two joined forces for a combined screenplay in January 2005. Kinberg wanted the comic book arc, The Dark Phoenix Saga, from the Uncanny X-Men by writer Chris Claremont and artist John Byrne to be the emotional plot of the film, while Gifted by Whedon and artist John Cassaday would serve as the political focus. The duo had 7 months to complete The Last Stand's script, and during the first week of work completed the first 80 pages, consisting of the first 2/3 of the plot. This incomplete draft was leaked to Ain't It Cool News, who proceeded to write a negative review. Vaughn later revised all of the major sequences in the film, but he did not receive a writer's credit. The writers had to fight Fox's executives to retain the Phoenix plot, as the studio only wanted the Cure story as it provided a reason for Magneto's conflict with the X-Men. Still, the disputes made them not add much for Jean Grey to do in most of the film's second half, as the executives considered the tone of the Phoenix story too dark for a mainstream summer movie, and that its appeal would be limited to hardcore fans rather than a general audience. Penn defended the divergences from the original Dark Phoenix stories, stating that the Phoenix was not a Firebird-shaped cosmic force because it doesn't fit into the world, and that Cyclops did not have as much screen time as Wolverine because the latter was more popular, and, with Cyclops, you can't see his eyes. It's a harder character to relate to for the audience. Killing Cyclops was Fox's decision, based on the availability of actor James Marsden, who was cast in Singer's Superman Returns. The studio considered killing him off-screen with a dialogue reference, but Kinberg and Penn insisted that Jean kill him, emphasizing their relationship. Xavier's death was intended to match the impact of Spock's demise in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, 1982, as Fox felt the script called for a dramatic turning point. Kinberg and Penn were originally cautious, but grew to like the idea of killing off Xavier. They decided to write a post-credits scene suggesting the character's return for a sequel. As the studio was simultaneously developing X-Men Origins Wolverine 2009, limitations were set on which mutants could be used for cameo appearances in X-Men 3 in an attempt to avoid risking character development for Wolverine. Gambit was considered for both the convoy scene being freed by Magneto and the Battle of Alcatraz, along with the X-Men, but the writers did not want to introduce a fan-favorite character and not be able to do him justice. Kinberg reasoned there just wasn't enough space, and considered Gambit would only work with as much screen time as Beast. Alan Cumming had been uncomfortable with the long hours he had to take with the prosthetic makeup as Nightcrawler in X2, but still planned to return for the sequel. The part of Nightcrawler was so minimal, however, that the studio felt it was not worthwhile to go through the long and costly makeup process, so the character was cut. Kinberg felt that there wasn't much left to do with the character. It also felt like he might tread a little bit on the terrain of Beast in terms of similarities in the characters and their political standpoints in terms of dealing with their mutancy. Nightcrawler's absence was later explained in the tie-in video game. The introductory scenes tried to emulate the Auschwitz opener for the first film, going with different scenes that resonated later in the plot instead of an action scene like in most blockbusters. Afterwards came a scene in the Danger Room, which was considered for the previous X-Men films, but never included for budget and writing concerns. The writers tried to make the simulation not feel extraneous by showcasing some of the character conflicts and abilities in a Days of Future Past inspired battle with a Sentinel. Another repurposed scene was Magneto attacking the convoy to free Mystique, Madrox, and Juggernaut, which Penn had previously envisioned for X2. Ratner collaborated with Penn and Kinberg in rearranging the plot structure of the film. Originally, the Golden Gate Bridge sequence was in the middle of the film, where the moved bridge was used by Magneto to free mutants being held prisoners on Alcatraz, and the climax was set in Washington, D.C. Ratner felt too many recent action films, such as Planet of the Apes, 2001, and X2 itself, had their ending in Washington, and the Golden Gate sequence would be the biggest sequence in my entire career, and suggested to instead put the Worthington Laboratory in Alcatraz, along with creating a face for the Cure, which became the character of Jimmy Leach. Kinberg agreed, as he previously argued with Penn about blowing so many things early in the movie. Filming X-Men: The Last Stand began shooting in August 2005 and wrapped in January 2006. Much of the film was shot at Vancouver Film Studios, the same location of X2. Locations included the Hatle Park National Historic Site and Royal Roads University, which doubled for the X-Mansion. An old lumber mill next to the Fraser River doubled as Alcatraz Island. The tight schedule made Ratner begin post-production the day I started shooting, sending the scenes he had just filmed to his editors. The editing team was led by Mark Helfrich, who had edited all of Ratner's films, assisted by Mark Goldblatt in the action scenes and Julia Wong with effects-heavy footage. According to associate producer Dave Gordon, this is the biggest production ever filmed in Canada. It used to be X2, now it's X3. The $210 million budget also made The Last Stand the most expensive film to be made at the time. The film's record would be first broken by Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest, 2006's $225 million budget. The original cinematographer was Philippe Rousselot, who eventually opted to depart the production. Dante Spinotti, a frequent collaborator of Ratner, replaced him with assistance of J. Michael Muro. Fox Filmed Entertainment co-chairman Thomas Rothman and Jim Giannopoulos debated whether Rogue should give Iceman a passionate kiss at the film's end or simply hold his hand. The two executives screened The Last Stand for their daughters, as well as the studio's female marketing executives, and the hand-holding prevailed. Giannopoulos stated that the kissing was all about sex, and we didn't want that. A strong campaign of secrecy about the script was enforced by Ratner and the writers. Even the actors had problems with getting full screenplays. The call sheets did not reveal all the characters, and many scenes were shot in varied ways. Both of the ending scenes were not included on the shooting script, with Ratner taking a small crew during one day's lunchtime to film the post-credits scene with Xavier, and later going to London to film Magneto in the park. In 2014, Kinberg said of the wobbling chess piece at the end of the film, "There is a scene before the credits where Magneto's playing chess, and you see that he can just make the chess piece move, so there's a hint that he's starting to regain his powers." The leap from there was that Cure from The Last Stand didn't work exactly the way they thought it would, and so we just leaped forward however many years and he's got his powers back. In 2017, according to co-star Elliot Page, in an interview during the Me Too and Time's Up movement, he accused Ratner of homophobia, saying he outed Page as a lesbian at a cast and crew meet and greet during production, which made him feel violated. 84. Fellow co-star and bisexual actress Anna Paquin expressed support of Page, stating that she was present when Ratner made the comment. Visual effects. To make sure the visual effects were made in just 1 year and without exceeding the budget, visual effects supervisor John Bruno shipped the 900 visual effects shots to 11 companies in 4 countries, United States, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and Canada, and did extensive pre-visualization. Their work begun in April 2005, before the director Brett Ratner had even been announced, and Bruno made sure to emphasize practical effects, shoot as many practical elements as possible, and only use CGI when we had to. For instance, complex wirework rigs were employed which enabled the actors to do some stunts without resorting to digital doubles, including a computer-controlled flying rig from Cirque du Soleil for Angel's Flight and one for Halle flying spins. Bruno estimates 1/6 of the effects budget was spent on the Golden Gate Bridge scene, which employed both a miniature of the bridge and computer graphics. The miniature was filmed over a period of 2 months in Santa Clarita, California, just outside of Los Angeles. The effects team would shoot 1 minute of footage outdoors each day at golden hour, complete with explosives, in order to have enough plates to composite the scene. The visual effects team had to work without reference footage due to the city of San Francisco vetting any filming in the actual bridge, including aerial shooting, as the area has restrictions on flying helicopters. Framestore CFC had further challenges in matching the varied weather conditions across the film's plates. As compositing supervisor Matt Twyford detailed, the elements consisted of cold, rainy night live-action footage from Vancouver, sunny day miniature elements, traditional misty day background plates of San Francisco, and of course the CGI bridge and CGI elements. Another miniature was for the Grey home, which had a destructible equivalent matching the Canadian location and also had a digital equivalent. A notable effect was the digital skin grafting, which rejuvenated the faces of senior actors Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, made by the brothers Strauss's Lola Visual Effects. Bruno made sure to ask the atomization made by Phoenix was not too vivid and gruesome, instead resembling oatmeal. Music. Main article, X-Men The Last Stand. Ratner, a fan of John Powell's work in The Bourne Identity, 2002, invited Powell to write the music for The Last Stand. Powell was unsure if the Bourne work was the kind of score that would fit the film, and Fox became reluctant on the composer's availability, given he was already scoring Ice Age, The Meltdown, 2006, at the time of Ratner's contact. However, Powell finished the Ice Age score early to accept the job, even if it resulted in a tighter schedule. Powell included references to the score from the previous 2 films as, "It all had to be in the same family and the same language." The Phoenix theme used lyrics from Benjamin Britten's Requiem Mass for the choir parts, 88. A soundtrack album was released on May 23, 2006. Marketing. The marketing for The Last Stand was darker and more ambiguous compared to the 2 predecessors. Rothman declared that the decision was made so the film would be different from all of the other movies in the summer, with a campaign that wanted people to stop and not have it be so immediately apparent that we're selling a movie. We're interested in selling an emotion and an idea. The film's official website was launched in October 2005. The teaser trailer release with King Kong the following December was done in conjunction with the studio releasing the film's first official screenshots of the film to USA Today. Diamond Select Toys created a toy line, scanning the actors from the film with likenesses for the first time in the trilogy. Additional product tie-ins came with Harley-Davidson and 7-Eleven. A 7-minute sneak peek aired on Fox Broadcasting 2 weeks before the film's theatrical release. Del Rey Books published a novelization of the film, written by comic book writer Chris Claremont, while Newmarket Press published The Art of X-Men, The Last Stand, from concept to feature film. Claremont also worked on Activision's tie-in video game, X-Men, the official game, doing the script along with screenwriter Zach Penn. The game's story bridges the events between X2 and The Last Stand, featuring Wolverine, Iceman, and Nightcrawler as playable characters, voiced by their film portrayers Hugh Jackman, Shawn Ashmore, and Alan Cumming. Patrick Stewart also appears as Professor X. The game was released to negative reviews and eventually underperformed commercially. Release: Theatrical X-Men: The Last Stand premiered at an out-of-competition event of the 2006 Cannes Film Festival on May 22, 2006. 2 days later, Hugh Jackman, Halle Berry, and Kelsey Grammer attended an advanced screening at USS Kearsarge, LHD-3, as the ship was en route to New York City for Fleet Week. The film was released in the United States on May 26, 2006, in 3,690 theaters, while also opening in 95 international markets that same weekend. Home media: X-Men: The Last Stand was released on October 3, 2006 on DVD and UMD by 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment. It was available in 3 editions: single disc, 2-disc, and a trilogy box set with the previous 2 films. Extras included 3 alternative endings, each with optional commentary by director Ratner, 10 deleted scenes, audio commentaries from Ratner, the writers, and the producers, and 2 hidden Easter eggs. The 2-disc edition came with a 100-page commemorative comic book with a new story written by X-Men co-creator Stan Lee, his first original Marvel comic book in 5 years. The DVD sold 2.6 million units in its first day, exceeding Fox's expectations, and sold a total of 5 million in its first week. A Blu-ray edition was issued in November 2006. X-Men: The Last Stand is included in the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray set, X-Men 3 Film Collection, which was released on September 25, 2018. Reception: Box office: X-Men: The Last Stand earned $45.1 million on its opening day and went on to generate $102.7 million during its 3-day opening weekend, making it the 4th highest opening weekend of all time, behind Shrek 2, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and Spider-Man. The film then grossed $122.8 million during the 4-day Memorial Day weekend, which was the highest at that time, surpassing The Lost World, Jurassic Park, and Shrek 2. It would hold this record until it was surpassed by Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End the next year. The film's release was also a new single-day record for Friday openings. The opening weekend gross was surpassed 6 weeks later by Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest, making The Last Stand's opening the 2nd highest of 2006. Internationally, The Last Stand topped the box office in 26 countries with a total gross of $76.1 million overall, but suffered competition from The Da Vinci Code, which retained the top spot in most markets and beat The Last Stand in international gross that weekend with $91 million. The film's second weekend dropped 67% to $34 million, which was the steepest post-Memorial Day opening drop on record. X-Men: The Last Stand eventually grossed $234.4 million in the domestic box office and $225 million internationally, for a worldwide total of $459.4 million, the 4th highest in domestic grosses and 7th highest worldwide for 2006. X-Men: The Last Stand was also the highest-grossing film in the franchise until it was surpassed by X-Men: Days of Future Past 8 years later. Critical response: on the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 56% of 237 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 5.9/10. The website's consensus reads, X-Men: The Last Stand provides plenty of mutant action for fans of the franchise, even if it does so at the expense of its predecessor's deeper moments. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 58 out of 100 based on 38 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale. Ebert and Roper gave the film a 2 thumbs up rating, with Roger Ebert saying, "I liked the action, I liked the absurdity, I liked the incongruous use and misuse of mutant powers, and I especially liked the way it introduces all of those political issues and lets them fight it out with the special effects." Stephanie Zacharek of Salon.com gave it a mixed review, noting that it was only half a mess, and that Ratner could have stuck a bit more closely to the Dark Phoenix narrative than he did. However, Zacharek did note that that third act captured some of the original story's majesty, praising the performances of Jackman, McKellen, Romine, and Jansen. Famke Janssen's performance was praised by critics. Matt Mueller of Total Film was impressed with Janssen's performance and said, playing the super freaky mind control goddess like GoldenEye's Xenia Onatopp's all-powerful psycho sister, her scenes, particularly that one with the house, crackle with energy and tragedy. If only the rest of X3 had followed suit. Justin Chang of Variety said the film was a wham-bam sequel, noticeably lacking in the pop gravitas, moody atmospherics, and emotional weight that made the first two Marvel comic book adaptations so rousingly successful. Lisa Schwartzbaum of Entertainment Weekly called it a diminished sequel, a brute force enterprise, and said it was an example of what happens when movies are confused with sandwich shops as franchise opportunities. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune characterized Ratner's approach as, "Forget subtlety. Let's blow things up." David Edelstein of New York Magazine called it just another big-budget B-movie. It's a fast and enjoyable B-movie, though. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone said, "Last Stand? My ass." Billed as the climax of a trilogy, the third and weakest chapter in the X-Men series is a blatant attempt to prove there is still life in the franchise. And there is. Just enough to pull a Star Trek and spawn a next-generation saga. X-Men: The Last Stand has been criticized by fans for killing off major characters such as Charles Xavier, Cyclops, and Jean Grey. The 2014 film X-Men: Days of Future Past has subsequently been viewed by some critics as a revision of those controversial plot elements in X-Men: The Last Stand. Other responses. Writer Kinberg stated, "There are a lot of things about X3 that I love, and there are a lot of things that I regret," detailing that he would have preferred the Dark Phoenix as the main plotline, and "I would have fought harder for that, considering that at the time, the darkness of her story was a little bit daunting on a huge $200 million studio movie, leading Fox to ask for rewrites." Having admitted to being unhappy with the way some elements of the film turned out, Kinberg then went on to direct and write the reboot film Dark Phoenix, which retold the events of X-Men: The Last Stand. Previous X-Men director Bryan Singer declared that The Last Stand isn't what I would have done, and he was dissatisfied with the busy plot and excessive character deaths. But Singer still liked some parts of the movie, such as Elliot Page's casting, leading Singer to bring Page back as Kitty Pryde in X-Men: Days of Future Past, and the scenes with Leech, which he described as really sweet moments. Matthew Vaughn, who was attached as director before dropping out, said that given the limited time they had to make it, the film was pretty good, but criticized Ratner's direction. "I could have done something with far more emotion and heart." I'm probably going to be told off for saying that, but I genuinely believe it. While promoting his own installment of the franchise, 2011's X-Men: First Class, Vaughn would say regarding The Last Stand that "I storyboarded the whole bloody film, did the script. My X3 would have been 40 minutes longer. They didn't let the emotions and the drama play in that film. It became wall-to-wall noise and drama. I would have let it breathe and given far more dramatic elements to it." Future. In February 2006, Ratner said that The Last Stand could be the final X-Men film. "We wanted to make sure the audiences knew that this was a trilogy. Even though they weren't made together like Lord of the Rings, 2001 to 2003, the next two X-Men films, X-Men Origins Wolverine, 2009, and X-Men First Class, 2011, were prequels that took place before the events of the first X-Men movie. The first film set chronologically after The Last Stand was The Wolverine, 2013, a standalone sequel that depicts Logan heading for Japan to escape the memories of what occurred during The Last Stand. Jackman and Jansen reprise their roles, while McKellen and Stewart appear in a mid-credits scene. X-Men: Days of Future Past, the direct sequel to The Last Stand, was released on May 23, 2014, with Jackman, Barry, Stewart, McKellen, Paquin, Page, Ashmore, Cudmore, Grammer, Jansen, and Marsden reprising their respective roles. The plot, inspired by the comic book Days of Future Past story arc, begins with a dystopian future set years after The Last Stand. Wolverine's consciousness is sent back in time to his 1973 body in order to guide the younger Xavier and Magneto into preventing the events that lead to the desolate future. The events of the film end up retroactively changing the continuity of the series, changing some events in films set after First Class, resulting in an altered timeline where Jean and Cyclops are still alive. Hugh Jackman reprised his role as Logan Wolverine in X-Men Apocalypse in a cameo as Weapon X and starred as the lead in Logan. The latter film left the fate of the X-Men in dire straits. However, after Disney acquired the film rights to the X-Men in 2019, Kelsey Grammer's Hank McCoy, Beast, returned in the post-credit scene of Marvel Cinematic Universe's 2023 film, The Marvels. Since then, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine and Aaron Stanford's Pyro returned along with other characters from the original X-Men trilogy in 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine. In March 2025, Marvel Studios announced several actors from across the original X-Men trilogy will be returning to reprise their X-Men roles in the upcoming 2026 film Avengers. Doomsday included among the principal cast of the film, which combines X-Men characters with MCU characters. This indicates the X-Men survive past the reset in X-Men Days of Future Past, and their universe will be colliding with the main 616 universe of the MCU to form Battleworld. The government has a Department of Mutant Affairs in X-Men The Last Stand, and it is headed by the mutant Dr. Hank McCoy, Kelsey Grammer, also known as Beast. The mutant community seems on its way into the mainstream, the goal long envisioned by Professor Charles Xavier Patrick Stewart, the head of the school where young X-Men learn to develop and control their powers. The school purrs along proudly with Wolverine, Hugh Jackman, as a role model, but then a kid named Leech surfaces, and all bets are off. His body produces an antibody to mutation, injected into X-Men, and their mutant powers disappear. They become regular folks with the same limited powers the rest of us use to scrape by. Leech is played by Cameron Bright, whom you may remember from Birth, the movie where he was a child whose body was occupied by the mind of Nicole Kidman's late husband. Bright has large, dark eyes and ominously sober features that make you think he might grow up to become chairman of the Federal Reserve or a serial killer. He's invaluable to the billionaire Warren Worthington II, Michael Murphy, who lives in shame because his son Warren III, Ben Foster, also known as Angel, has a 16-foot wingspan. A flashback shows young Angel in a room full of blood and feathers, having tried to cut the wings from his back. This self-hate is nurtured by Worthington, whose shame about his son translates into hatred of mutants in general. He buys Alcatraz, imprisons Leech, begins to manufacture the antibody, and campaigns for a cure for mutation. But what if mutants don't want to be cured? What if they're happy the way they are and cherish their differences? Xavier has always tried to encourage that kind of thinking, but Magneto, Ian McKellen, his archenemy in X-Man land, takes a more direct approach. He wages war against Worthington and all those who would foist a cure on the mutants. Although Magneto has always been the villain of the series, this time he makes a good point. So strong is Leech's anti-mutant power that a mutant need only stand near him to lose his or her abilities. Maybe the antibody works through pheromones. Meanwhile, mutant cure clinics spring up around the country and are picketed by pro-mutant militants. Extremists arm themselves with guns that can fire the antibody and go out to shoot themselves some mutants. Beast, as the administration's cabinet minister in charge of mutant affairs, is caught in the middle. There are so many parallels here with current political and social issues that to list them is to define the next presidential campaign. Just writing the previous paragraph, I thought of abortion, gun control, stem cell research, the gay gene, and the Minutemen. Curing mutants is obviously a form of genetic engineering and stirs thoughts of cures for many other conditions humans are born with, which could be loosely defined as anything that prevents you from being just like George or Georgette Clooney. The fact is, most people grow accustomed to the hands they've been dealt and rather resent the opportunity to become normal. Normal in this context is whatever makes you more like them and less like yourself. X-Men The Last Stand raises all of these questions in embryonic form, but doesn't engage them in much detail because it is often distracted by the need to be an action movie. Consider, for example, the lengths Magneto goes to in order to neutralize young Leech. The kid is being held on Alcatraz? Very well then. Magneto will stand on the Golden Gate Bridge and use his powers of industrial strength levitation to rip loose a whole span of the bridge and rotate it so that it joins Alcatraz with the mainland and his forces can march on Worthington's fortress. Countless innocent citizens die during this operation, falling from the bridge or otherwise terminating their commutes. It seems to me that Magneto in this case is, well, a terrorist. So fanatic is his devotion to mutants that he will destroy the bridge in the service of his belief. Xavier, however, is like, how does it go? The vast majority of mutants who are peaceful and responsible citizens. One of the distractions in all the X-Men movies is that the X-Men are always getting involved in local incidents that have little to do with the big picture. They demonstrate their powers during disagreements and courtships, neighborhood emergencies, psychological problems, or while showing off. After 3 movies, you'd think they would have learned to coordinate their efforts so that Storm, Halle Berry, for example, is not suddenly needed to brew up a last-minute storm and save the neighborhood city-state world. My guess is there are just plain too many mutants, and their powers are so various and ill-matched that it's hard to keep them all on the same canvas. The addition of Beast, Angel, and Leech, not to mention Multiple Man, Juggernaut, and the revived Dr. Jean Grey, reborn as Dark Phoenix, causes a mutant jam because there are too many X-Men with too many powers for a 104-minute movie. There are times when the director, Brett Ratner, seems to be scurrying from one plotline to another, like that guy who had to keep all of his plates spinning on top of their poles. All the same, I enjoyed X-Men The Last Stand. I liked the action, I liked the absurdity, I liked the incongruous use and misuse of mutant powers, and I especially liked the way it introduces all of those political issues and lets them fight it out with the special effects. Magneto would say this is a test of survival of the fittest. Xavier would hope they could learn to live together. Against the odds, this third X-Men movie, inevitably referred to as the last in the trilogy to torture completist geeks into buying the DVD, turns out to be a lively and likable picture, a fun summer blockbuster, which is capable of being scary and even rather affecting. The second X-Men was a chaotic, cranked-up mess that failed to ask or answer the pertinent question about the X-Men. If, collectively, they can do almost anything, then how can you have a story? How can it work without, as it were, dramatic gravity, especially if they are pitted against each other? But here, it somehow works. The battle lines are the same. There are 2 separate wings of the mutant movement. The peaceful centrist wing is represented by Professor Xavier, Patrick Stewart, who believes in dialogue with the authorities, while the radical wing, led by the dissident outlaw Magneto, Ian McKellen, is in revolt against the straight, non-mutant world. As ever, the mutants are all good-looking enough to be models, except they are supposed to be picturesquely older. Whenever these people referred to themselves as mutants, I kept thinking of the unfortunate character in Daniel Clowes's comic book Ghost World, who has a mole that has grown into a crackly brown carapace, covering her entire face. There would be no point in her applying to Professor Xavier's X-Men Academy, even if she could fly or lift buses. There is a new twist. A billionaire businessman, appalled by his own son becoming a mutant, has invented a cure for this condition and proposes to market it throughout the United States. It instantly becomes an explosive point of controversy for the mutant and non-mutant worlds alike. Is the cure a good thing, or is it an insidious agent of control? Is taking the cure a form of collaboration and self-hate for the mutant community? Mutantism has entered the mainstream of political debate in the form of a new Minister for Mutant Affairs, Dr. Hank McCoy, played by a blue-skinned, mutton-chopped Kelsey Grammer. But the radical mutants' worst fears appear to be realized when it becomes known that the cure is being used as a weapon. Phials of the contentious liquid are being fired like darts at the most dangerous mutants. This plot is the loose frame for a sprawling story that encompasses the destinies of many different X-Men, including that of Jean Grey, the only X-person who does not have a campy, gladiator-ish handle. She is the most powerful of the mutants, and it is her fierce identity that director Brett Ratner and screenwriter Simon Kinberg put at the heart of the film. setting it up with a droll flashback showing the younger Magneto and Xavier paying a visit to the preteen Jean and her bewildered parents. Digital trickery is deployed to create McKellen and Stewart as their younger selves. It works better with McKellen, who plausibly appears as if in the era of his RSC Macbeth. Stewart's face just looks weirdly waxy and unlined, as if he had been injected with enough Botox to rejuvenate a bull elephant. It is a modest but distinct triumph for the film that it tours its vast gallery of X-Men and gives us a little sketch of each without quite losing contact with the central driving force of the plot. There is in particular a poignant little moment for Anna Paquin as Rogue, whose X-power means she can't touch anyone, seeing a boy she likes hanging out with someone else, and sadly deciding to take the cure. Okay, first things first. I have to give props to Brett Ratner for stepping into this X-Men film at the last possible moment and putting it together in an insanely short amount of time. It was barely a year between the time Ratner came on board and the movie showed up at your local multiplex. I still don't know how they managed to do it. Right here is where I wanted to say, and now for the bad news, but really it's not so much bad as it is tepid, lukewarm. If there was any doubt about all the statements coming from those involved in the production that X-Men The Last Stand would indeed be the last full-on X-Men movie, I'm here to tell you that they weren't kidding. Either that, or they'll have to chalk this entire film up as a dream sequence, a la that one season where the TV show Dallas jumped the shark. This is it, folks, and they're not subtle about it at all. Yes, characters die, but not only that. Some characters lose their mutant abilities, and I'm not talking about the extras, although I'll try to make that the extent of the spoilers in this review. The film opens 20 years in the past with a much younger Charles Xavier and Eric Lenscher, pre-Magneto, visiting a preteen Jean Grey. The special effects crew did an alternately really cool and creepy job on making these two guys look much younger. At times it was really convincing, and during a couple of shots it looked like Botox gone horribly wrong, but I digress. It turns out that Miss Grey is a Class 5 mutant, putting her either on par with Charles or even above him in power level. We come to find that Charles put a series of blocks in her mind to shield her from the fact that she is in fact such a powerful mutant in order to protect her and others. Problem is that he couldn't quite bury it far enough, and it lurks just beneath the surface. We are also introduced to Warren Worthington III, aka Angel, as a young boy, grappling with his, as far as he sees it, deformity. From there, we are taken to a battle scene with Wolverine, Storm, Kitty Pryde, apparently the only mutant on the planet without a cool handle, and is severely underutilized throughout the film Colossus. The point being that they're not ready, thus saith Wolverine. Soon, Xavier and Cyclops each get a psychic shot upside the head, indicating that Jean Grey's consciousness is still possibly alive out there. Cyclops goes off to Alkali Lake, where Jean supposedly died, and lo and behold, she appears to him, alive but slightly creepy. On another track, the story is following the creation of a new drug that can cure mutants of their powers and make them into plain old Homo sapiens. Some mutants rejoice at the news, while others are outraged. Of course, it starts out with the powers that be stating that it will be completely voluntary, but that doesn't stop them from developing weapons which can deliver the drug from a distance. Of course, Magneto becomes leader of the Brotherhood, while the X-Men grapple with the ethics of the so-called cure. There is plenty of action in the movie to justify its existence as a superhero action flick. No doubt. Big production pieces with hundreds of mutants, fireballs, people flying through the air and smashing stuff and so on. The problem is that there isn't really much else to draw you in. Also, there are moments where the lack of production time comes through, and it looks like they skimped here and there. See, the problem is that a lot happens in this film that should have enough of an emotional impact to make you feel like you've been kicked in the gut. Except it doesn't. At all. And that stinks, because with the things that happen to characters we know in this film, we should leave the movie theater dumbstruck and shaking our heads at the losses. Now, I'm not a filmmaker, so I can't put my finger on what exactly the problem is, but I reckon it's a combination of both script, direction, and performance. What else is there, right? I'm sure that you've heard by now that main characters die in the film. With one of them, you'll blink if you miss it, and wonder if you did miss it. Another has some impact, but by the end of the scene actually makes you question whether it could have been stopped. The third one, at least, does have some impact, but that's more attributable to the character we all know is the star of these X films. It was actually more jarring, and one of the better handled scenes in the film, to see one of the mutants lose their powers involuntarily and what happens to them afterwards. The other thing that really confuses me is whether or not there is a clone of Halle Berry walking around out there. This cannot possibly be the same actress who has won an Oscar for Crying Out Loud. Nope, I refuse to believe it. In one scene, she delivers a eulogy for one of the characters who has died, and it was stone cold boring. This was a scene that should have had a powerful impact, but it fell completely and utterly flat. Imagine being at a funeral, and the eulogy is so trite and dull that you find yourself looking at your watch. Simply awful. There was even a throwaway line by Ian McKellen towards the end that made me cringe. They do manage to throw the fans a bone or two. We see the Danger Room briefly. A Sentinel makes a semi-appearance. Kelsey Grammer as the Beast actually worked pretty well, I thought, right down to the Stars and Garters comment, and the portrayal of Jean Grey as Phoenix was pretty well done, with some shots of her reminding me of the Dark Phoenix saga from the comics 20 years ago. We even finally get to see Bobby Drake totally ice up. I also really like the guy they picked to be Juggernaut. That dude just has to be a mutant in real life. And of course, once again, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine is the real star of the film. So overall, it really was disappointing, but at least it delivered some action, tidbits for the fans, and a few surprises. The problem was that by the time they were done, the surprises didn't seem to mean as much as they should. Who rate it? However, the detected human heat signatures in the camp are multiple men, and his copies, Magneto and the Brotherhood, attack Alcatraz with the intention to kill a young mutant named Jimmy, whose genome is used to create the cure. They overwhelm the military troops until the remaining X-Men arrive to confront them during the fight. Kitty Pryde saves Jimmy from Juggernaut. Icemen subduce Pyro, and Logan distracts Magneto for Hank McCoy to inject him with the cure nullifying his powers. The Phoenix awakens and begins destroying anyone within range of her powers. Logan realizes that only he can stop the Phoenix due to his healing factor and a adamantium skeleton. When Logan approaches her gray mome, momentarily gains control and begs him to save her. Logan is forced to fatally stab. Gray killing her sometime later. Mutant traits are finally obtained, and Xavier's school is still operating with Storm as head mistress. The President of the United States appoints McCoy as ambassador to the United Nations, Rogue having taken the cure. Rekindles her relationship with Iceman. Meanwhile, Magneto sits at a chessboard in San Francisco, seemingly human and weak, and as he gestures toward a metal chess piece, it wobbles slightly. Additionally, Elliot Page appears as Kitty Pryde, a mutant with the ability to face through matter and walk through solid objects. Her clear affection for Iceman further adds to the tensional ready present between Iceman and Rogue. Maggie Grace was considered for the role before Ratner invited Page, who impressed the director with his performance in Hard Candy 2005. Page initially declined, not wanting to jump to Hollywood filmmaking, but accepted after reading the script. Page said part of his motivation was having a new experience. I thought, well, when else am I going to have a chance to wear a leather suit and run through exploding things? Why not be a superhero? Over a change, Daniel Cudmore appears as Peter Rasputin Colossus, a mutant with the ability to transform his body into an organic steel, while also granting him superhuman strength and a resistance to physical damage. While in that form, Cudmore wore a foam latex muscle suit covered with a chrome-plated plastic, plus a hard plastic head to have the metal skin on the set, with some digital augmentation being used to enhance the facial expressions. A digital double was used only for stunts that could not be achieved practically, such as the fastball special where Colossus throws Wolverine at Magneto. Ben Foster appears as Warren Worthington. Angel, the mutant son of an industrialist who has feathered wings which allow him to fly. The static wings were models with a 15 feet 4.66 meter wingspan and 5 feet 1.5 meters height glued to Foster's back, replaced with computer-generated ones when movement was required. Caden Boyd appears as Young. Angel Michael Murphy appears as Warren Worthington II, the head of Worthington Labs, the corporation developing the cure. Worthington expects to rid his son of his mutant abilities. The addition of the character allowed Angel to integrate into the cure plot, which also added a parallel between Warren's discovery of his son's mutation with a father. Finding out about Hisson's homosexuality, Daniel Ramirez appears as Callisto, the leader of the Omega. Callisto is a mutant with enhanced superhumanly acute senses, who senses mutants and their powers and possesses superhuman speed, and is an expert hand-to-hand combatant. The character combined the powers of the comics Callisto with another of the Morlocks, Calibanin, and was written as someone who could be beautiful but with a tough persona. Ramirez had originally auditioned to play the mutant prostitute. Stacey Xand impressed Brett Ratner so much that he decided to bring her in to play Callisto. Shara Akju appeared, COVID irrationist who works at Worthington Labs, and the mutant cure. She is killed by Kid Omega. Act Low signed without a completed script and erroneously said her character would be mutant. Cecilia Reyes Joseph Summer appears as the president. The president of the United States is tolerant of mutants but fearful of the Brotherhood's threats while creating the role. The producers felt that a different president, like an African-American or a Oman, had become a cliché in itself and went for a traditional route with an elder Caucasian. Mansmer was invited by Ratner following their collaboration in The Family Man 2000. Bill Duke appears as Trask, the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Trask as the President of the United States during the war against the mutants. The character is probably related to the comic books Bolivar Trash. However, his first name is never mentioned in the film, and he's portrayed as African Amin in the comics. Bolivar Trask is the head of Trask Industries and creator of the mutant hunting sentinel. Sarek Dane appears as multiple mana mutant and thief recruited by the Broth. Rudina Prison Truck Madrox has the ability to create every large number of copies of himself. The writers considered Denis' performance memorable. Despite being featured in only 2 scenes, Madrox's wardrobe invoked the symbols worn in his comics costume. Other actors who portrayed mutants are Myling Minkana's Psylocke, a mutant with the ability to teleport herself through areas of shadow, although that depiction differs significantly from the comics. Nomaz Arclight, a mutant who has the ability to generate shockwaves of concussive force. Ken Lunga's Kiddo, Mega Mutant with the ability to eject spikes from his body, most notably his face. Though the character resembles the comic book's Quill and was later confirmed as such, though the official cast credits erroneously Red Kid Omega and Cameron Bright as Jimmy Slash. Leech, a mutant who has the ability to neutralize the powers of nearby mutants. Various characters were included at the suggestion of editor Mark Helfrich, who brought Marvel's X-Men Encyclopedia to director Brett Ratner, searching for mutants who could make appearance. These include Fat, a mutant that is a very large man who can slim down to fit in a smaller space, played by 2 actors, Viamua Large Mode and Richard Ye Small Mode. Spike, played by Lance Gibson, a mutant who battles Wolverine in the forest by extruding bony spikes from his flesh. The character was added because the editing team felt that the original cut-a-scene portrayed Logan as a cold-blooded killer, which could be changed if another mutant attacked Wolverine before he struck the Brotherhood, and Glob Herman, played by Clayton Dean. Watmuff, a mutant with transparent skin. Mark Helridge portrays an unnamed mutant with ash gray skin. Various other mutants make cameos at the X-Mansion. Shauna Kane and Kia Wong reprised their cameo roles as Sirenin and Jubilee respectively, and 3 identical girls in the background in one scene, a reference to the Step Forward Cuckoo. Olivia Williams portrays Moira Mack. Taggart Adrian Hoff, who previously voiced Nightcrawler in X-Men the Animated Series 1992 to 1997, appears as John Gray, Jean's father. X-Men co-creator Stan Lee and writer Chris Claremont have cameos in the film's opening scene as the neighbors of young Gan Gray, the sergeant directing defensive preparations before the Brotherhood assaults. Alcatraz Island is played by R. Lee Lloyd. Adams portrays the green-skinned mutant that climbs the guard tower on Alcatraz. Many fans believe this was Toad. However, the credits list him as Lizard Man, and Brett Ratner confirmed it was Anali, Avalanche, and Vanisher also appear. However, it is not known who portrayed them. Bryan Singer, the director of the first 2 20th Century Fox X-Men films, left the project in July 2004 in favor of developing Superman Returns 2006 for Warner Brothers Pictures, Singer stated that he didn't fully have X-Men 3 in my mind, in contrast to a fully formed idea for a Superman film, an interest in joining that franchise. By the time of his departure, Singer had only produced a partial story treatment with X2 2003. Screenwriters Dan Harris and Michael Dougherty, who accompanied him to Superman Returns, the treatment focused on Gan Gray's resurrection, which would also introduce the villainous Emma Frost role. Intended for Sigourney Weaver, Frost was empathy manipulating Jean's emotions in the treatment, and like the finished film, Magneto desires to control Hero, overwhelmed by her powers. Jenna kills herself, but Jean's spirit survives and becomes a godlike creature, which Dougherty compared to the Star Child in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Actresses had signed for only 2 films. Hugh Jackman's contract included the approval of director, initially offering the position to Darren Aronofsky, with whom he had just finished filming on The Fountain. 2006, Joss Whedon, whose comic book story line gifted from Astonishing X-Men, which he wrote, was integrated into the script's plot, turned down the offer because he was working on a Wonder Woman film. Rob Bowman and Alex Pios were also rumored to be up for consideration, though Pruz personally turned it down, citing feuds with Fox president Thomas Rothman while producing iRobot. 2004, Zack Snyder was also approached, but he was already committed to 300. 2007, Peter Berg was also considered to direct the film, but he too turned down the job. Guillermo del Toro was also offered to direct the film, but turned down as he was already committed to Pan's Labyrinth. 2006, in February 2005, with still no director hired, Fox announced a May 5th, 2006 release date, with filming to start in July 2005 in Vancouver. A month later, the studios signed Matthew Vaughn to direct and pushed the release date 3 weeks to May 26th. Memorial Day weekend, Van cast Kelsey Grammer as Beast, Daniel Ramirez as Callisto, and Vinnie Jones as Juggernaut, but family issues led him to withdraw before filming began. Vaughn was also cautious of the tight deadlines imposed by Fox, stating that he didn't have the time to make the movie that I wanted to make in October 2023. Vaughn stated that he left the project after a group of executives had tried to sign Halle Berry on with a fake script, which included scenes of Storm rescuing kids from Africa. Channing Tatum was vied for the role of Gambit before the character was written out of the film. Brett Ratner, who was previously considered to direct X-Men 2000 in 1996, and John Moore were both in the running to replace Vaughn during pre-production. On June 5, 2005, Ratner was confirmed as Van's replacement. Ratner said he was surprised to get an invitation, as he thought he would have no chance to do a comic book film after the canceled Superman flyby for Warner Brothers with a limited knowledge of the X-Men mythos. Ratner trusted his writers. It's scenes from the original Marvel publications. Simon Kinberg, who had worked on 2 other Fox-produced Marvel Comics film adaptations, Fantastic Four and Elektra, both 2005, was hired as writer for X-Men 3 in August 2004. X2 co-writer Zach Penn was separately working on his own draft, and the two joined forces for a combined screenplay in January 2005. Kinberg wanted the comic book arc The Dark Phoenix Saga from the Uncanny X-Men by writer Chris Claremont and artist John Byrne to bet the emotional plot of the film, while gifted by Hedone and artist John Cassaday would serve as the political focus. The duo had 7 months to complete The Last Stand script, and during the first week of work, completed the first 80 pages consisting of the first 2/3 of the plot. His incompleted raft was leaked to Ain't It Cool News, who proceeded to write a negative review. Vaughn later revised all of the major sequences in the film, but he did not receive a writer's credit. The writers had to fight Fox's executives to retain the Phoenix plot, as the studio only wanted the Cure story, as it provided areas and for Magneto's conflict with the X-Men. Still, the disputes made them not add much for Gan Gray to do in most of the film's second half, as the executives considered the tone of the Phoenix story too dark for a mainstream summer movie, and that its appeal would be limited to hardcore fans rather than a general audience. Penn defended the divergences from the original Dark Phoenix stories, stating that the Phoenix was not a Firebird-shaped cosmic force, because it doesn't fit into the world, and that Cyclops did not have as much screen time as Wolverine, because the latter was more popular, and with Cyclops you can't see his eyes. It's a harder character to relate to for the audience killing Cyclops was Fox's decision based on the availability of actor James Marsden, who was cast in Singer Superman Returns. The studio considered killing him off-screen with a dialogue reference, but Kinberg and Penn insisted that Jean kill him, emphasizing their relationship. Xavier's death was intended to match the impact of Spock's demise in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, 1982, as Fox felt the script called for a dramatic turning point. Kinberg and Penn were originally cautious, but grew to like the idea of killing of Xavier. They decided to write a post-credit scene, suggesting the character's return for a sequel, as the studio was simultaneously developing X-Men Origins Wolverine 2009 limitations were set in which mutants could be used for cameo appearances in X-Men 3 in an attempt to avoid risking character development for Wolverine. Gambit was considered for both the convoy scene being freed by Magneto and the Battle of Alcatraz, along with the X-Men, but the writers did not want to introduce a fan-favorite character and not be enough space, and considered Gambit would only work with as much screen time, as Beast Allen had been uncomfortable with the long hour she had to take with the prosthetic makeup as Nightcrawler in X2, but still planned to return for these. The part of Nightcrawler was so minimal, however, that the studio felt it was not worthwhile to go through the long and costly makeup process. So the character was cut. Kinberg felt that there wasn't much left to do with the character. Edels of Elt like he might tread a little bit on the terrain of Beast, in terms of similarities in the characters and their political standpoints, in terms of dealing with their mutancy. Nightcrawler's absence was later explained in the tie-in video game. The introductory scene strive to emulate the Auschwitz opener for the first film, going with different scenes that resonated later in the plot. Instead of an action scene, like in most blockbusters afterwards, came a scene in the Danger Room, which was considered for the previous X-Men films, but never included for budget and writing concerns. The writers tried to make the simulation not feel extraneous by showcasing some of the character conflicts and abilities in a Days of Future Past inspired battle with the Sentinel. Another repurposed scene was Magneto attacking the convoy to free Mystique, Madros, and Juggernaut, which Penn had previously envisioned for X2. Ratner collaborated with Penn and Kinberg in rearranging the plot structure of the film. Originally, the Golden Gate Bridge sequence was in the middle of the film, where the move bridge was used by Magneto to free mutants being held prisoners on Alcatraz, and the climax was set in Washington, D.C. Ratner felt too many recent action films, such as Planet of the Apes 2001 and X2 itself, had their ending in Washington, and the Golden Gate sequence would be the biggest sequence in my entire career, and suggested to instead put the Worthington Laboratory in Alcatraz, along with creating a face for the Cure, which became the character of Jimmy Leach. Kinberg agreed, as he previously argued with Penn about blowing so many things early in the movie. X-Men: The Last Stand began shooting in August 2005 and wrapped in January 2006. Much of the film was shot at Vancouver Film Studios. The same location of locations included the Hatley Park National Historic Site and Royal Roads University, which doubled for the XM Zionode lumber mill next to the Fraser River, doubled as Alcatraz Island. The tight schedule made Ratner begin post-production the day he started shooting, sending the scenes she had just filmed to his editors. The editing team was led by Mark Helfrich, who had edited all of Ratner's films, assisted by Mark Goldblatt in the action scenes and Julia Wong with effects heavy footage, according to associate producer Dave Gordon. This is the biggest production ever filmed in Canada. It used to be X2, now it's X3. The $210 million budget also made The Last Stand the most expensive film to be made at the time. The film's record would be first broken by Pirates of the Caribbean. Dead Man's Chest 2006's $225 million budget. The original cinematographer was Philippe Rousselot, who eventually opted to depart the production. Dante Spinati, a frequent collaborator of Ratner, replaced him with assistants of Jamichael Muro. Fox Filmed Entertainment co-chairman Thomas Rothman and Jim Janopoulos debated whether Rogue should give Iceman a passionate kiss at the film's end or simply hold his hand. The two executives screened The Last Stand for their daughters, as well as the studio's female marketing executives, and the hand-holding prevailed. Janopoulos stated that the kissing was all about sex, and we didn't want that. A strong campaign of secrecy about the script was enforced by Ratner and the writers. Even the actors had problems with getting full screenplays. The call sheets did not reveal all the characters, and many scenes were shot in varied ways. Both of the ending scenes were not included on the shooting script, with Ratner taking a small crew during one day's lunchtime to film the post-credits scene with Xavier, and later going to London to film Magneto in the park. Review of X-Men The Last Stand film. The third time's not the charm in X-Men. The Last Stand, taking over the reins from Bryan Singer, Helmer, Brett Ratner, delivers a wham-bam sequel, noticeably lacking in the pop gravitas, moody atmospherics, and emotional weight that made the first two Marvel comic book adaptations so rousingly successful. Robust action, the usual top-of-the-line visual effects, and massive fanfiction. Worldwide, all but guarantee a superpowered opening when 20th Century Fox releases the pick. May 26th, though less than marvelous repeat biz means Stan's legs may fall short of the $45 million grossed internationally by X2. X-Men United ancillary biz will be appreciably huge, taken as a trilogy, despite the door being left open, inevitably for an X4. The X-Men picks most closely resemble the original Star Wars movies in their qualitative trajectory. Just as the second film in each instance repped a substantial elaboration of its predecessors' storytelling, visual richness, and thematic depth, so X-Men The Last Stand suffers from the same coarsened writing, diminished imagination, and occasional bursts of self-parody that plagued Return of the Jedi. The result, though it delivers only in fits and starts, is still sharper and more inventive than most comic-adapted fare and eventually gets the job done, as far as action buffs are concerned, but don't expect. Pick to win any new converts or satiate those fans for whom the pleasures of the franchise went beyond the purely visceral. That's a shame. Considering the tale cooked up scribe Zach Penn, who collaborated on X2 and Simon Kinberg, plus the portentous title, will have viewers stoked for the most cataclysmic showdown yet between mankind and mutant kind, equipped with powers as thrilling to behold as they are potentially destructive. The mutant race is once again divided into two factions led respectively by the wise wheelchair-bound Professor Charles Xavier, Patrick Stewart, and megalomaniacal metal-controlling Magneto Ian McKellen. Story opens 20 years before the events of the previous film, when both men, then allies, paid a visit to a young girl named Gan Gray Haley Ram and persuaded her to harness her staggering telekinetic ability, Hot Pick, then returns to the present-day setting of Professor Xavier's elite school for mutants with Lupin Logan or Wolverine Hugh Jackman as testosterone-driven as ever, and Weather Girl Storm Halle Berry serving as second. In command, Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, James Marsden, has been broody and out of sorts since the supposed death of girlfriend Jean Fona Jansen. At the end of X2 dialogue early on, betrays a weakness for expository quips, "Not everyone heals as fast as you, Logan." While the poignant quandary of rogue Anna Paquin, who can't touch BF Iceman Shah, Ashmore without sapping his life force here, plays more like adolescent soap opera. Meanwhile, all is not quiet on the mutant front, thanks to the recent invention of an antibody that suppresses the X gene, thus rendering explicit the previous pick's subtext. Equating mutation with homosexuality, Magneto responds by mobilizing a mutant army to terrorize the public until the so-called cure is destroyed. Situation grows even more complicated with the sudden reappearance of Jean, seemingly alive and well. Yet sinister psychic undercurrents lead Professor Xavier to believe Jean, chillingly played by Jansen, is in fact possessed by her fiery and ultra-powerful alter ego Phoenix. This strand, off the story necessarily but disappointingly watered down from the Kamiya-Buck's darkly compelling Phoenix saga, should have purists in a leather, where Singer brought a lingering resonance to event the series' quietest moments. Ratner seems primarily concerned with breadth than speed at 105 minutes. Piece is a half hour shorter than its predecessor. There's a rushed, disorganized feel to the narrative, which drops and picks up subplots at random, and has no compunction about bumping off veteran characters while introducing a host of new ones. Most important addition to the X-Men's ranks is the peaceable Dr. Hank McCoy, a Beastford Kelsey Grammer, whose physical actions are almost as nimble as his intellect. Perhaps the prominence of this blue giant explains why Mystique, the similarly huge shapeshifter, played by Rebecca Roma, gets so little attention this time, around past complaints that these series boasts too many personalities to be accommodated within a barely 2-hour feature, are right on the money here, with the proliferation of new mutants like Angel Ben Foster, Beautiful enough to give Emma Thompson a run for her Halle and Jimmy Cameron Bride, a boy with the ability to dispel mutant powers, solely during the climax, a huge face. Offstage, Dad Alcatraz does begin to get an inventive groove on wittily exploiting the mutants' various powers and playing them against each other. Yet even here the film feels at a loss to convey that anything truly momentous is at stake. Visual effects, supervisor John Bruno, and stunt coordinators Wade Eastwood and Mike Mitchell keep the action at a reasonably high level, though without rivaling the digital polish or martial energy of X2. Similarly, Dante Spinetti's widescreen cinematography and overall look seem brighter and flatter than their previous incarnations. Prince, screened at Cannes, was intermittently out of focus related information, even if Bryan Singer had returned to direct the third X-Men movie. X2 would have been a tough act to follow. However, he hinted at a clear path forward, or at least enough of a hint that it allowed fans to imagine what could have been. When Singer decided to direct Superman Returns instead, he left a sequel in limbo. Fox was going to move forward with or without him, and it was a bumpy road just to put someone in the director's chair, let alone find a way to get the right script, even with these issues. X-Men. The Last Stand isn't a disaster if X2 didn't exist, and this was the direct sequel to 2000's X-Men it would be on. But X2 raised expectations, and in The Last Stand's attempt to pursue two potentially great plotlines, it reduces the impact of both the movies, starts with a digitally deeged Charles Xavier Patrick Stewart and Magneto Ian McKellen visiting a young Gangrey Halle Remand, discovering she's basically a Damien child. Then we get another prologue, where a young Warren Worthington 3 Caden boy string to saw his wings off when your movie has two prologues highlighting two different characters who never interact with each other over the course of the movie. You may want to rethink your plot. The beginning of X-Men, The Last Stand is a big warning sign that we're going to be pursuing two storylines, the Dark Phoenix saga and Gifted, the latter of which is about the mutant cure which permanently removes a mutant's powers. Either one of these stories could have made a terrific movie on its own. The cure plotline is still the driving force for most of the movie. However, the execution is painfully clumsy because it's so awkwardly paced, due in part to the Dark Phoenix distractions. So even with Jean out of the picture, you have a storyline where it feels like the movie was eviscerated in the edit. Angel's a cameo plus-sized role in Rogue's consideration of the cure is given almost no time to breathe. Happens in The Last Stand, and most of it lacks weight. It feels like all of the emotional heft was put on Dark Phoenix, and then the cure was meant to work that way. You don't use a subplot between the two. That's what Dark Phoenix is. As a handbag for emotions, they have to be integrated into the larger story. Because if they're relegated to a supporting role, then their significance is diminished. When Cyclops James Marsden dies, that should be a huge deal. It should shake all of the X-Men to their core. Their friend and leader has been murdered by his wife. Instead, we get a clumsy explanation of how Jean Fonda Jansen actually had a split personality. Because Professor X invaded her mind and implanted mental barriers, the moral dubiousness of Xavier's actions actually provides a new perspective on the professor. Got to a new morally dubious place where he's angry on the defensive and uncertain of his actions. Additionally, putting in these barriers raises the question of who is the real. Gangrey, was there ever a good person deep down, or was that just a product of Xavier meddling with Hermd? While I was never a fan of the Damien child genie, and thought that these con mutation was pretty clearly laid out in the conclusion of X2, this approach to the Dark Phoenix could have provided some fascinating character exploration. Naturally, they don't build on it, because we have to rush back to the cure. The only bridge between the cure and Dark Phoenix is a loose theme regarding control versus choice. It may be safer for everyone if Jeannie's kept under control, but it removes her ability to choose the cure. May be safer for humanity, but when it's put into guns, it removes mutants' ability to choose. From Magneto's side, he's still controlling Genia, and he's removing the choice from mutants like Rogue Anna Paquin, who want the cure. It's a difficult conundrum, but the plot is so schizophrenic that it can't build this theme into anything coherent. Brief flashes of a better movie keep flickering throughout X-Men, The Last Stand, beyond the unrealized greatness off the two plot lines. When Genius Leang on the examination table and Logan Hugh Jackman is watching over her, it's a nice visual callback and show the roles of the domestic furl personalities have switched. Then the moment is obliterated by having Genia announce that their roles have reversed. Another scene loaded with potential is when the team is pinned down and sees a cartridge of syringes filled with the cure. For a moment, It looks like they're considering the ethics of using a weapon that would remove a fellow mutant's power. Then you realize they're just formulating a plan on how to use it against Magneto, and the ethical ramifications never entered their minds. While it's easy to lay all of the blame at the feet of director Brett Ratner, it's not entirely fair to do so in this case. X-Men: The Last Stand lost the director it should have had because Singer found another comic book movie he wanted. More screenplays were scrambled, plot lines were altered, and while all of this isn't unusual for blockbusters, the real hit to The Last Stand was Matthew Vaughn departing before filming was about to begin. While the reasons behind his departure could be chalked up to family issues and studio meddling, the fact remains that Ratner was brought into a picture that was already in pre-production. He was under a tight deadline, and Fox knew he was competent enough to meet the release date, and his personality wouldn't rock the boat. Fox hired Ratner to get a competently made blockbuster, and that's all they got. The flash and style present in X2 was erased. And The Last Stand is more in line with the featureless X-Men. Even the plot and that set pieces are similar to the first movie. The Last Stand doesn't have a lot of action beyond a fight inside a house, Wolverine fighting no-name mutants in a forest, and the climactic battle at Alcatraz, which is really just a bigger version of the climax of X-Men. Mutants versus mutants at an American landmark. The movie doesn't take any chances, so it's not unsurprising that it retreads familiar ground. Where The Last Stand goes from frustrating to infuriating is where it becomes smug about how daring it thinks it is. As I said earlier, Cyclops' death is a bit surprising, but the emotional impact is botched because of the pacing and execution. Also, if you know the behind-the-scenes machinations, then you know he's being killed off, not because it's best for the narrative, but because it's best for Marsden going off to shoot Superman Returns. But where the movie really wants to shock the audience is by killing Professor Xandra, moving Magneto's powers. These are the two characters who open the movie, and they have been the core of the trilogy's overarching conflict. Wolverine may sell more toys, get more quips, and have more fans, but Xavier and Magneto are the pillars of the franchise. If The Last Stand were truly daring, it would have stuck to its guns about the harsh conclusions for Xavier and Magneto. Instead, it concludes by slinking back to the status quo. The awkwardly placed scene where Xavier talks to his students about ethics doesn't really relate to the larger plot. It's to set up the stinger about his resurrection. As for Magneto losing his powers, that should be a fitting conclusion to the character's arc. That's a fate worse than death for him. But the final moment of the film shows Magneto's powers aren't truly gone. Additionally, for this little scene to happen, you have to assume that the most wanted terrorist on the planet can go out in public and play chess in the park on a bright sunny day. X-Men: The Last Stand is a franchise installment in the worst meaning of the phrase. It keeps the franchise going through its presence alone. The movie's highest aspiration is adequate. And that's pretty much what everyone brought to the table. Having the fastball special Kitty Pryde, Ellen Page as a main character, and giving Storm Halle Berry a more proactive role are what count as the film's major achievements. All that's truly memorable about X-Men. The Last Stand is how much potential it wastes us, but as we would see in X-Men, movie could be so much worse. More details of X-Men: The Last Stand film. Third in the series, X-Men: The Last Stand opens with two flashbacks that set the narrative and thematic stage. The first rolls the clock back 20 years to Professor Xavier's initial meeting with a young Gan Grey, the powerful telepath who didn't really die at the end of X2. The professor tells her that she has more power than she can imagine. The question is, he says, will you control that power or will you let it control you? And the problem of power and what to do with it frames this film, just as it did the previous two. The second flashback introduces a tortured teen named Warren Worthington, 3, who is desperately and bloodily trying to cut off two stubbly white wings emerging from his shoulder blades. Warren's adolescent self-loathing symbolizes the angst and internal conflict virtually every other mutant in the series has felt, and it raises the specter of a question that will consume the remainder of the story. Given the choice, or alternatively by force of law, would and should mutants relinquish the attributes that alienate them, Fast forward 10 years, and the boy's father, Warren Worthington, too has discovered a cure for mutants, an antibody that permanently suppresses the mutant gene. The government sees it as a breakthrough that can normalize tense relationships between mutants and non-mutants. Any mutant who wants the cure can receive it, thus rejoining mainstream society. Professor X, his X-Men, and the younger mutants at his school received the news with queasy confliction for some, such as the weather. Wielding Storm. The idea of voluntarily renouncing her powers is tantamount to rejecting her identity for others, such as Rogue, who cannot touch other human beings without sapping their life energy. The promise of a normal life is enticing for his part. The renegade master of magnetism doesn't want to talk things over. He wants to fight. Nobody is going. To cure us, Magneto tells his mutant followers we are the cure. He's convinced that it's only a matter of time before the government compels its cure upon all mutants, whether they want it or not. And he immediately sets out to muster mutant forces to war. Meanwhile, in what seems like a miracle, Jean turns up alive, but it's not long before Professor X realizes the trauma of her experience has broken a barrier, had placed in her mind a barrier intended to shield her from Phoenix, a dark, violent personality lurking within her with the fate of humanity, and mutant hanging in the balance. Professor X, Storm, Wolverine, and Iceman, along with new X-Men Angel, Warren Worthington, Three Beast, Kitty Pryde, and Colossus, must not only stop Magneto, but find a way to keep Phoenix from annihilating them all. Professor X remains a steady voice of reason in a world inflamed by passion and paranoia. He emphasizes the importance of personal responsibility, telling a group of young mutants that their powers can be used for great good or great destruction, a lesson very similar to the one Peter Parker learns in Spider-Man X-Men The Last Stand. Also delivers a strong message against prejudice and bigotry. It's clear that the alienation some mutants have experienced is unjust. Given that reality, the film presents two very different responses. Stoic Professor has chosen to help mutants understand who they are and how they might coexist with run-of-the-mill humans. She believes peaceful integration is possible, provided mutants take responsibility for their powers. Xavier's example stands in sharp contrast with that of Magneto, who has rejected any notion that humans and mutants can ever get along while addressing the complexity of our freedom to make choices. The film implies properly that some choices are morally wrong. Wolverine initially doesn't understand why Professor X placed a block in Jean's mind to prevent Phoenix from taking over her aunt's. Jean had no choice at all. But the professor tells him, I chose the lesser of two evils. Clearly restraining some of Jean's power was preferable to unleashing it upon those who could not defend themselves on a more concrete level. A number of the X-Men put their lives on the line to save others and to keep Magneto from decimating humanity, and not all of them survive. Wolverine tells his cohorts, if we don't fight now, everything our friends died for will die with them. One of the more dramatic rescues, both literally and figuratively, happens when Angel swoops down to rescue his falling father. That means that the very thing the elder Worthington feared and hated actually saves his life. In a class on mutant ethics, Professor X discusses the possibility of projecting the psyche or life force of a dying person into someone whose body was healthy but who was clinically brain dead. He doesn't say whether this would be ethically acceptable or not. A scene after the end credits, however, answers the question, at least on screen. Professor X's obliterated by Phoenix earlier in the film, but this last scene hints that he successfully projected himself into a brain-dead patient effectively. He's cheated death and moved his soul from one body to another. Thought the movie never used those terms to describe the transfer magnet to describes Genius Agatis a characters as / praise God help us nothing's changed. Since we noted in our review of X2 that the blue-kinned Mystique appears just barely beyond nude. Clothes too strong a word here. What is new is that a government soldier's hoots Mystique with a cured art that eliminates her shape-shifting powers and her blue sheath, leaving her fully naked, curled up in the fetal position on the floor, reunited with his wife. Scott Summers kisses Jean, but Phoenix takes over and uses the intimate encounter to kill him later. A ravenous Phoenix reads Wolverine's lustful mind, kisses him, and begins stripping his clothes off. She's wearing a skimpy halter top and shorts, and she wraps her legs around Wolverine suggestively. In this passionate scene, he seems bent and reciprocating until he realizes that it's Phoenix, not Jean. When Bobby Drake insists that he can have a romantic relationship with Rogue, Even though they can't touch, She Wonder Show will deal with the lack of a physical relationship, saying, "You're a guy, Bobby, your mind's only on one thing. If you've seen either X1 or X2, you'll have a reasonable idea of what to expect violence-wise in X3. But just as these Kun film upped the violence quotients, this one kicks things up yet another notch short. Most of the main characters are involved in hand-to-hand fighting at some point, including female characters, and this film easily has the highest body count of the trilogy, but true to its comic book origins, the violence is not excessively bloody or gory, just perpetual mystique. Kicks, punches, and chokes, government officials and military guards, including one man who snaps magnet to destroys vehicles full of government agents, Juggernaut, repeatedly hurls Wolverine through walls, while Storm takes a beating that includes having her head rammed through a glass table, one of most graphic scenes. Since Wolverine's battle with Spike, a mutant who spontaneously generates and fires bones, projectiles, one of the seam beds itself, in Wolverine's shoulder and two more in his stores. So Wolverine eventually closes the distance and ends Spike's life. Another scene depicts the Clawed Hero dispatching 6 other mutants similarly shortly thereafter. Magneto hurls him a long way through a dense forest. Wolverine hits a tree and falls perhaps 100 feet. And he's covered with bloody wounds from the trees. Another of Wolverine's mutant enemies has the power to regenerate severed limbs, so as Wolverine cuts off his arms, they reappears. A Wolverine slices again and again and again. Giving up, he kicks his Falfo in the crotch and says, "Regrow those." A mutant with retractable spikes in his face pulls safe male scientist cheek to cheek, then expels them. Thankfully, we don't see the result after Magneto detaches the Golden Gate Bridge from its mirroring the Carson the bridge, most of whose occupants have fled the bonfire. Ash does so when Storm fires lightning bolts at a female mutant holding onto a chain link fence. The resulting electrocution is so fierce that her lip stug glows and smoke. Some of the most disturbing moments come when Phoenix obliterates at least half a dozen people telepathically. When she turns her destructive attention to Wolverine, he regenerates as fast as she can destroy his flesh when he reaches her hearing. The nearly subdued Jean begs him to save her. He does so in the only way he believes he can, killing her with his claws. The camera lingers as we watch him retract his hand from her lifeless body. Magneto suggests that Phoenix's unfettered violent nature is preferable to the self-control Jean enjoyed because of Professor X's mind block. He wanted to hold you back. I want you to be what you are, as nature intended. Magneto has no qualms about taking human life. In support of his cause, they wish to cure us, but I say to you, we are the cure for Homo sapiens on one level. X-Men The Last Stand is exactly what you would die. Expect a non-stop adrenaline-charged action ride. It's darker than its predecessors as expected, and its intense violence and one sultry scene between Wolverine and Phoenix meant that the film's PG-13 ratings should be taken very seriously by families with a hankering to see Marvel's mutants in action one more time. Equally expected but worthy of a deeper discussion is that under this film's comic book veneer is a modern-day parable about tolerance, choice, and power. What does it end up saying about them? That's complicated. The force of intolerance are symbolized by the government and the scientists working to separate mutants from their power, and the language they used to describe those with genetic mutation hints that they perhaps even more than Magneto and Coar. The film's real villain, Angel's father, for example, describes mutants as people who are afflicted and corrupted with a disease that needs to be cured. Worthington too, and some of the government officials have clearly rejected the idea that mutants have a place at the humankind table. Fear drives them to seek to control and find a solution to the mutant problem. Magneto, meanwhile, demands complete acceptance by society on his own terms. So in reality, he's just as intolerant as the humans he so despises. Somewhere in between these two philosophical extremes are the X-Men, who are trying to figure out what it really means to love and accept others and to make the right choices in the process, because the film doesn't provide a single right answer to the philosophical questions it raises. Even those involved with it have different takes on what it all means and how it affects fans. Known for his outspoken activism for homosexual acceptance, Ian McKellen said, "Marvel Comics will tell you that many fans of comic books are young blacks, young Jews, and young gays who tend to feel disaffected by society. I agree with Marvel Comics that X-Men is the most important, radical, and relevant of the entire series they produce." Christian producer Ralph Winter believes the movie pushes viewers to consider how we behave toward those who are different from us. I think the issue about tolerance is how we treat each other and how we get along with people we don't quite understand or who don't quite look the way we do. He said, "How do we live together? How do we treat each other?" That established X-Men The Last Stand does a better job of phrasing tough questions than it does answering them, which is apparently what Mr. Winter intended Noon wants to be preached at in a movie theater. He said movies that raise issues are more interesting than movies that try to give answers. The message that every person is valuable and deserves acceptance comes through loud and clear. Between explosions and dismemberments, that is what's less clear, is whether tolerance means embracing the choices other people make along the way for the solution to the conflict. Those words generate we have to turn away from the movie screen and toward the Bible for solid guidance. Cast directed by Brett Ratner, screenplay by Simon Kinberg, Zach Penn, story by Michael Dougherty, Dan Harris, Matthew Vaughn, Bryan Singer, produced by Lauren Shuler, Donner Ralph Winter, Avi Arad, starring Hugh Jackman, Halle Berry, Ian McKellen, Vona Jansen, cinematography, Dante Spinity, edited by Mark Hell, Mark Goldblatt, Julia Wong, music by John Powell. Production companies: 20th Century Fox, Marvel Entertainment, The Donner's Company, Dune Entertainment, distributed by 20th Century Fox. Release dates: May 24, 2006, running time 14 minutes. Countries: United States, United Kingdom, language English, budget $210 million, box office $460.4 million. So friends, this was the review of today's film, X-Men, The Last Stand, 2006, and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.